Hi, welcome back guys. This is your sensei, back with another fanfiction. This is the first part of What If Naruto Becomes Grinning Reaper? Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Prologue, The Grinning Shadow of Konoha. Konoha glowed under a crimson dusk, its streets alive with the clatter of vendors and the laughter of shinobi unwinding after missions. Yet beyond the bustle, in the quiet alleys where graves stood sentinel, a boy named Naruto Uzumaki wove a darker thread. In public, he carried an unsettling charm, yellow-gray hair flowing long, a single braid dangling on the right side, and chartreuse eyes that gleamed beneath his bangs. A jagged scar marked his face, neck, and left pinky, with others hidden beneath his clothes, hinting at battles no child should know. His black robe, tattered yet oddly regal, swirled around him beneath a crooked casa hat that cast shadows over his sly grin. A gray scarf knotted at his hips trailed like a specter's tail, while black earrings, an emerald ring, prayer beads, and a chain of 7 mourning lockets, one engraved with a date and a name, clinked softly at his hip. Blackened fingernails and a high, eerie laugh made even seasoned ninja pause. To Konoha, he was the village oddity, a prankster orphan blamed on the Nine-Tails curse. Beneath it all, however, stirred a soul older than the village itself, laced with memories of coffins and a defiant familiarity with death. Naruto's childhood was a dance of isolation and manipulation. Sealed with the Nine-Tails at birth, his whisker-marked face drew venom from villagers, whispers of demon following him like shadows. Unlike the boy who might crave their love, this Naruto fed on their fear. By 5, he roamed Konoha's edges, yellow-gray hair catching moonlight as he carved skeletal grins into fences not for attention, but to watch shopkeepers shudder. His laugh, sharp and unsettling, rang through the night like someone who had watched too many things end. At 6, he haunted the cemetery, kneeling by tombstones and murmuring that guests should not be so still. The third Hokage, observing from his tower, saw a grieving child but did not perceive the cold intellect plotting beneath the crooked hat. Naruto's mind churned with designs no boy should hold, each step a move in a game only he understood. The Ninja Academy, beginning at 7, became his stage for unease. Enrolled among peers like Sakura and Sasuke, Naruto was a walking enigma, disruptive, elusive, and unnerving. He slouched in class, doodling sides and skulls entwined with thorny vines across his papers, smirking when Irika confiscated them. During breaks, he perched on the academy roof, yellow-gray hair swaying, and asked morbidly what would be left when someone's chakra ran out. Sakura flinched and muttered that he was a freak, while Kiba steered clear, unnerved by his laugh. Sasuke alone watched him with an uneasy fixity. Naruto's grin seemed to hold too much knowing. In sparring he dodged with eerie grace but rarely struck back, as if taijutsu bored him. Teachers scolded his absence from team drills, unaware that he slipped out of the academy to observe medic tents and watch wounded being carried away, his lockets clinking as he silently counted losses. History lessons on the Great Wars bored him. He hummed under his breath, fingers tracing his scarf as though he had lived through those battles himself. When Mizuki lectured on fallen heroes, Naruto giggled and remarked that heroes made the best guests, loud enough to make Hinata pale beside him. Irika chalked it up to attention-seeking, blind to the shadows settling over his student. At 8, a buried past began clawing free. After a prank smearing ash across the academy gate and signing it with a skull, Naruto hid in a temple clutching a stolen prayer bead. Sleep took him and the world shifted. He experienced a vision of silver hair and chartreuse eyes flaring, of a skeletal scythe cutting through memory like silk. Coffins stretched in endless rows and lockets gleamed with names. Figures rose with stiff, puppet-like motions, their eyes empty. An echo of his own voice, older and amused, told him that life was a jest if one could outplay death. He awoke with the beads pressing into his palm and his eyes briefly phosphorescent. The Undertaker's presence woven into his core made him realize he was not simply Naruto. He carried something like the Grim Reaper reborn, a desperado who had once mocked the laws of death. The truth electrified him. Life's meaning, he decided, was not friendship or titles but the chance to cheat fate and preserve what he cherished. The Nine-Tails chakra surged within him like a feral hymn to that purpose. Konoha's endless wars and piling graves felt futile. He would try to rewrite what was final. But a boy needed a mask, a way to cradle death unseen. Kaito, the village Undertaker, would become that mask's foundation, a grizzled man who prepared fallen shinobi and had been forgotten by most except the grieving. At 9, Naruto found Kaito's shop, a crumbling shack by the graveyard heavy with incense and sorrow. Kaito, scarred by his son's death in the Third War, drowned in sake and resentment. Naruto fashioned a disguise for his visits. A black-haired, unremarkable boy in plain clothes meant to draw no attention. His tunic bore faint ash stains, his garb practical and somber, like a mourner's shroud. No visible scars, no glowing eyes, no lockets, just a forgettable kid blending into village crowds. He slipped into the shop bearing stolen biscuits and used a soft voice threaded with the Undertaker's oddly charming cadence to tell the old man that he had heard Kaito fixed up guests. Kaito, starved for kindness, warmed to the quiet boy and failed to see the predator beneath. Naruto spun stories of wandering the village and made Kaito laugh. Then he pried gently into the Undertaker's trade, and Kaito, loose-lipped with familiarity, explained the practical, technical work of his craft. By 10, Naruto began to weave a different kind of trap. One night, with Kaito slumped over a bottle, Naruto lowered his voice into something like the Undertaker's whisper and asked how it would feel if Kaito's son could walk again. Kaito stiffened, desperate. Naruto pretended to know a technique from an ancient scroll that could stir the dead. To convince the old man, he manipulated a rat's movements so that it twitched as if animated. Then he promised that if Kaito helped him, Kaito would have his son back. The broken man pledged himself, bound by a new, fragile hope. The shift was subtle. The black-haired boy became Kaito's aide, hauling bodies and learning mortician's arts, cleaning, preparing, and concealing battle's marks. Alone, Naruto twisted those skills to different ends, assembling uncanny figures that moved with awkward, puppet-like motions while offering no real life. Kaito, shaken, buried the failures and clung to Naruto's vow. Naruto's hands never faltered. He performed mortuary tasks with unnerving precision and a practiced calm. He used Kaito's contacts to obtain bodies from battlefields and conceal their origins, maintaining the pretense of helping the grieving or blaming ambiguous rogues where needed. The old man crumbled under grief and drink. Naruto prospered. By 12, Naruto had taken over the shop. Kaito sat as a ghost of himself while Naruto reshaped their lair. Chapter 1. Shadows of Team 7. The sun beat down on Konoha, its warmth barely touching the shadowed corners where Naruto Uzumaki moved with ease. Fresh from an academy graduation, he had scraped through, passing every test by the skin of his teeth, his yellow-gray hair a tangled mess beneath the crooked casa hat. He stood apart, both familiar and alien. To the village, he remained the Nine-Tails vessel, a prankster too strange to trust. Beneath that face he kept the mortician's disguise. Naruto Uzumaki, Sasuke Uchiha, and Sakura Haruno were assigned to Team 7 under the guidance of the elusive Kakashi Hatake. Sasuke, the brooding prodigy, carried the weight of his clan's ruin. Sakura, sharp and determined, clung to her feelings for Sasuke while striving to prove herself. Naruto was the wild card. His academy performance had been mediocre and his demeanor unsettling. Rumors followed him. How had a kid who doodled skulls and skipped spars become genin? Irika had pushed for him, citing potential, but even he had noticed Naruto's giggling during the ceremony and the lockets glinting at his hip. Team 7 waited for their sensei as hours dragged. Naruto sprawled on the deck, yellow-gray hair fanned out, tossing a pencil and catching it with a laugh that grated on Sakura's nerves. He hummed a tune too melancholic for a 12-year-old. Sasuke's dark eyes narrowed each time Naruto's laughter rose. Sakura's patience frayed with every chuckle. Sakura snapped at Naruto to cut it out. Sasuke agreed that she was right and told Naruto to be quiet. Naruto tilted his head, a shadow thrown by his hat crossing his face, and flashed a wide, unsettling grin as he proposed a game. Each teammate must tell a joke, and if the jokes were funny he would stop. If not, he would keep entertaining himself. Sakura groaned and rubbed her temples, calling him impossible. Sakura forced a joke about a kunai going to therapy and hoped for a laugh. Naruto reacted with a pitying snort and dismissed it, encouraging her to try harder. Sakura flushed with embarrassment and urged Sasuke to deal with him. Sasuke's glare was severe. He did not want to play, but he preferred silence to the endless laughter, so he muttered a sardonic quip about ninja and lanterns. Naruto considered it, called it fitting, and declared it more like a funeral poem, then resumed his teasing laughter. Their exchanges left Sakura exasperated and Sasuke tense. Naruto's laughter continued, an unsettling reminder that their teammate was out of the ordinary. 3 hours later, a puff of smoke announced Kakashi's arrival. He strolled in with silver hair tilted and a mask concealing all but one thoughtful eye. Sakura immediately confronted him about being late. Sasuke folded his arms and waited for an excuse. Naruto, propped on one elbow, remarked that maybe Kakashi had gotten stuck in a coffin shop, then laughed and winked as his lockets glinted. Kakashi offered a light, practiced explanation about helping an old lady with groceries and the woman insisting on proper thanks. Sakura called the excuse ridiculous, Sasuke expressed disdain, and Naruto laughed again, suggesting the old lady had paid in biscuits. Kakashi's gaze lingered on Naruto a moment longer, taking note of the scars and the odd ease about him. The team moved to the academy rooftop where the village sprawled below. Kakashi leaned against the railing and prompted introductions, starting with a curt declaration of his own name and an admonition that the rest was not their business. Sasuke introduced himself with cold focus on training and a vow of revenge. Sakura introduced herself with enthusiasm about studying and a shy admission of admiration for Sasuke, followed by a dislike of loudmouths and a dream to become a great kunoichi. Naruto introduced himself with a wide grin, saying that he liked jokes and making others laugh, had no real dislikes, enjoyed annoying people to keep things lively, and declared that his dream was to be together with his friends forever. His words were cheerful but carried an awkward intensity that made Kakashi's visible eye narrow in thought. Kakashi then informed them that they were not yet genin and that one more test remained. The revelation shocked Sakura and tightened Sasuke's jaw. Kakashi explained that his colleagues had arranged an extra challenge and that another examiner would test them the next day at Training Ground 10 at dawn. With a lazy wave, he vanished in smoke, leaving Team 7 reeling. Sakura complained about another test and the change of proctor. Sasuke said nothing but planned silently. Naruto, turning away with a soft laugh while twirling a prayer bead, called it fun. At dawn the following day, Training Ground 10 lay ringed by trees and heavy with dew. Team 7 arrived tense but prepared. Sasuke adjusted his kunai pouch, Sakura squared her shoulders, and Naruto lounged against a stump, hat tipped low and lockets flashing. Their examiner was Asuma Sarutobi, cigarette in hand and trench knives strapped at his side, his easy grin hiding a professional steel. Asuma introduced himself and explained the task. They were to protect an item, a dummy scroll sealed with red wax, while he attempted to take it. He said they would have to hold it for 1 hour without losing it. Sasuke stepped forward to receive the scroll. Asuma tossed it and Sasuke caught it smoothly, securing it in his pouch. Sakura began to plan strategies while Naruto, amused, treated the exercise as a game of keep away. Chapter 2: The Dance of Shadows. Naruto called someone his favorite in a playful tone, but his eyes flicked to Asuma's knives with a calculating glance. Asuma stubbed out his cigarette, his grin widening as he told them he would give a 10-minute head start and to use it wisely. He turned and strolled toward the trees, smoke trailing behind him, reminding them the clock was ticking. Sasuke's gaze hardened. The forest of training. Ground 10 swallowed Team 7 whole, its dense canopy fracturing the dawn into slivers of gold. 10 minutes, Asuma's head start, ticked down like a heartbeat, each second a pulse of urgency. Sasuke Uchiha led the charge, the dummy scroll tucked tight in his pouch, his dark eyes scanning the trees for ambush points. Sakura Haruno scrambled behind, her pink hair snagging on branches, her mind racing with half-remembered tactics. Naruto Uzumaki brought up the rear, his yellow-grayish hair swaying, a single braid bouncing against his cheek. his black robe fluttered, a gray scarf trailing like a ghost sigh, and 7 mourning lockets at his hip clinked with every step. To Sasuke and Sakura, Naruto seemed a giggling nuisance, barely a genin, but beneath that facade he hid a different, more focused truth. Asuma Sarutobi, Konoha's blade-wielding tactician, hunted them not to crush but to test their teamwork, or expose its absence. The scroll was bait, unity was the prize. Team 7, fractured as ever, had no clue. The trio crashed through underbrush, leaves crunching underfoot. Sasuke vaulted a fallen log, his movements sharp and efficient, the scroll's weight a silent anchor. Sakura stumbled after, panting as her stamina ran low. Naruto moved oddly gracefully at the tail, his robe billowing as he twirled a wooden marker etched with sutras between his black-nailed fingers like a baton. The stick glowed faintly, unnoticed by his teammates. Naruto teased them about plans in a light, teasing way as he leaped a route without breaking stride, wondering aloud whether they should hide, fight, or pretend the scroll was lost. Sasuke refused to look back and ordered them to be quiet and keep up, already weaving through the pines. Sakura shot Naruto a glare and agreed with Sasuke for once, telling Naruto to stop joking and help. Naruto expanded his grin and offered to help if asked nicely, dodging a branch with eerie ease. His speed was a hair too smooth for the slacker he played. Sasuke's silence held warning, focus, or fall behind. They hit a clearing where Sasuke skidded to a halt and announced they should set traps, wires, kunai, anything to slow Asuma. He pulled shuriken and eyed branches for anchor points. Sakura nodded and struggled through her suggestion about a perimeter trap, fumbling for her tools as her book smarts kicked in. Naruto sat on a stump and mocked the idea of traps, gesturing at Asuma's knives and the challenge they posed, then tilted his hat back and watched the marker spin on his finger. Sasuke suggested a decoy, but dismissed, leaving the scroll unguarded. Naruto volunteered to be bait and run around to distract Asuma, his playful offer tensing his grip on the marker as he tested its weight. Sasuke told him to do whatever but not to ruin the plan. The countdown burned lower. Sasuke's traps glimmered into a web of wires and blades. Sakura hovered, offering half-baked ideas and losing confidence. Naruto planted a marker in the ground like a small sign, the sutras catching faint light. When the last seconds passed, Naruto noted the time with a soft giggle as the forest fell still. A puff of cigarette smoke signaled Asuma's arrival. He stepped into the clearing with trench knives loose in his hands and a faint shimmer of wind chakra along their edges. He nodded at the wirework and acknowledged their effort, then flicked his wrist to snap a single wire with a gust of wind, sending a kunai clattering harmlessly. Sakura yelped and Sasuke cursed under his breath. Naruto called Asuma a compliment and clapped, then removed his marker from the ground and spun it. For the first time, the sliver of a different side of Naruto showed as his speed surged. He darted to the clearing's edge and hurled the marker to embed into a tree behind him. Asuma raised an eyebrow in evident surprise. Sakura urged Sasuke to act, and Sasuke launched a volley of shuriken, using the wires to guide their arcs and box Asuma in. Sasuke then tested Asuma with a spinning kick aimed at the Jonin's side. Asuma sidestepped with effortless precision, demonstrating his taijutsu by blocking the kick with a forearm and complementing Sasuke's form while pointing out its predictability. Sakura, desperate to help, threw a kunai but missed and accidentally triggered one of Sasuke's traps. Blades flashed in the clearing, but Asuma moved like a dancer, using wind chakra to deflect the steel without harm. Sakura shrank back in embarrassment as Sasuke warned her to stay out of it. Naruto seized the chaos with a grin. He produced another marker, revealing several tucked in his robe, and charged with surprising strength. He swung the marker like a staff at Asuma's shoulder. Asuma blocked with a knife, expecting splintered wood but instead finding it held strong as sparks flew and the sutras pulsed faintly. Asuma pushed back with a controlled wind pulse and seemed intrigued. Naruto flipped away, landing in a crouch and giggling, pleased with the test. The exchange escalated into a choreography of skill and sabotage, all presented in fast, stylized motion. Sasuke unleashed a fire-style fireball jutsu that roared toward the clearing's edge. Asuma countered with wind release, dust cloud, a swirling gust designed to obscure vision rather than injure. Sakura coughed and stumbled in the haze, narrowly avoiding a stray ember as her weaker reflexes struggled. Sasuke dove through the smoke with shuriken flying blind but finding their mark to temporarily catch Asuma's sleeve on a tree. Asuma chuckled and neatly freed himself by cutting the restraint, impressed by the attempt but remaining unflappable. Naruto weaved through the chaos, his unusual agility revealed in clean, dynamic movements that emphasized speed and grace over harm. Naruto sprinted up a tree, his hat tumbling away to reveal his face, scars stark and jagged, his chartreuse eyes blazing like cursed flames. Sakura gasped and froze. Sasuke faltered, unnerved by the glow. Naruto giggled and remarked that it looked pretty as he hurled a wooden marker from the canopy. The marker spun like a boomerang, grazed Asuma's cigarette and snuffed it out before embedding in another trunk. Asuma whistled, relit a cigarette, and noted that the kid had flair. The team's disunity showed. Sasuke fought alone, his mid-level skill on display as his throwing star technique pinned Asuma's paths, his fire technique forced Asuma to weave, and his hand-to-hand combat clashed briefly with Asuma's comm blocks. Sakura lagged behind, dodging poorly and shouting obvious warnings that Sasuke ignored. Naruto played his own game, his wooden marker strikes were precise, one striking Asuma's knife mid-swing, another thrown to sever a trap wire, ostensibly helping Sasuke while sowing chaos. His giggles punctuated every move as he flipped over Asuma's wind attack and landed beside Sakura, who shrieked when his scarred face loomed close. Naruto teased her playfully while dodging her flailing punch. Asuma took it easy and toyed with them. His hand-to-hand skill dominated spinning to disarm Sasuke's throwing knives with the flat of his blades, sidestepping Naruto's wooden markers with a lazy grin, and letting Sakura scurry untouched to test her nerve. His flying swallow technique hummed, wind energy extending a blade's reach to slice a wooden marker midair, not breaking it but nicking its inscriptions as a warning. Asuma muttered that they were durable, curious. He avoided heavy technique, using only enough wind to scatter leaves, keeping pressure without overwhelming. Sasuke panted, the scroll still secure and his chakra dipping from his fire technique. He set a new trap, wires laced with explosive tags hidden in the brush, and ordered Sakura to stay back. Sakura nodded, clutching a tree, her book knowledge useless without action. Naruto, hair wild without his hat, twirled two wooden markers, one in each hand, and charged Asuma head-on in a reckless show to mask his probing. The clash was electric. Naruto's strength surged as wooden markers cracked against Asuma's knives, holding firm where wood should snap. He spun, scarf flaring, striking high and low, then hurled a marker skyward. It arced and dove like a hawk, forcing Asuma to roll. Asuma laughed, enjoying the kid's nerve, and countered with a wind-enhanced jab that grazed Naruto's robe without causing serious harm. Naruto's eyes flashed and he flipped back to land on a branch, teasing Asuma that it had been a close call and using a nickname as he giggled. Sasuke seized the moment and ignited his trap. The explosive tags flared and smoke and sparks erupted. Asuma vanished in the haze and reappeared behind Sakura, looming to test her resolve rather than strike. She screamed and threw a small dagger that hit dirt. Sasuke muttered that it was pathetic and dove in, his hand-to-hand combat a blur of kicks and punches with a throwing star tossed mid-spin. Asuma parried, knives dancing, letting Sasuke land a glancing blow to boost his ego and acknowledging that it was not bad. Perched high, Naruto watched the team's cracks and grinned. He dropped down with wooden markers swinging, aiming to rattle as much as to aid. One marker skimmed Sakura's sleeve and she yelped, tripping into Sasuke's path. Sasuke stumbled and cursed, his trap wires snapping uselessly. He cursed at Naruto and called him an idiot. Naruto giggled, dodging Asuma's playful wind gust, his scarf a gray streak, and pretended an apology with a light remark while using the chaos to measure how quickly Asuma exploited their weaknesses, storing every move for his dark plans. 45 minutes passed and the hour loomed. Asuma ramped up his pressure while still holding back lethality. His hand-to-hand flow disarmed Sasuke's throwing stars with a spin and knocked a wooden marker from Naruto's hand to watch him scramble. He brushed past Sakura, wind energy ruffling her hair and making her freeze. The scroll remained with Sasuke, untouched, as Asuma circled and probed their unity, finding none. Sasuke fought fiercely and scorched a tree with his fire technique. Asuma deflected it with a wind blade and smirked. Naruto's wooden markers rained, one embedding so deep it cracked bark. Asuma nodded in approval but flicked a knife to send it back to Naruto's feet and told him to keep practicing. Desperate, Sakura begged Sasuke to give her the scroll and promised she would hide it. Sasuke scoffed, dodging Asuma's feint and insisting she would lose it quickly. Naruto suggested it might be funny to let her try as he retrieved his marker and giggled. His sarcasm stung, but his next throw was pinpoint, grazing Asuma's sleeve and forcing a dodge. Asuma's eyes narrowed. Naruto's skill was beyond genin level, but Asuma let it slide as he focused on the team's collapse. In the final minutes, Sasuke wove a net of throwing star technique and wires. Asuma cut through with wind energy but paused to let Sasuke reset. Naruto flipped through the branches, markers spinning, striking Asuma's knife with a clang as sparks flew. His scars glowed under sweat and his eyes burned chartreuse beneath a reaper's mask-like expression. Sakura stared, her heart pounding. Sasuke's throwing knife wavered with a shiver of doubt. Asuma, unfazed, sent a gust of wind to scatter leaves and give them one last chance to unite. But Team 7 frayed. Sakura tripped and remained ineffective as her warnings were ignored. Sasuke fought alone, the scroll a burden and his ego a chain. Naruto danced apart, his wooden markers a storm, helping just enough to hide his true purpose. Every clash became a lesson for his plans, every flaw a note toward darker aims. Asuma watched with his cigarette glowing, seeing no team, only scattered pieces. The hour ended with the scroll still in Sasuke's possession but victory feeling hollow. Naruto's giggle echoed like a promise of shadows yet to come. The final seconds bled away and the air in Training Ground 10 was thick with smoke and tension. The clearing lay ravaged. Charred grass smoldered from Sasuke's fire technique, snapped wires dangled like broken spiderwebs, and Naruto's wooden markers jutted from trees like markers, their inscriptions faintly glowing. Sasuke Uchiha stood panting, the scroll secure in his pouch, his dark hair slick with sweat and his eyes burning with defiance. Sakura Haruno slumped against a trunk, her pink hair tangled and her face pale from dodging and failing, her dagger long lost in the dirt. Naruto Uzumaki lounged on a branch above, his yellow-gray hair wild, braids swinging and his scarred face bared, the hem of his black robe torn and his gray scarf askew as he twirled a wooden marker and giggled softly. Asuma Saratobi stood at the clearing's heart, cigarette glowing and trench knives sheathed, his grin calm but knowing. He had not snatched the scroll, but his wind energy had exposed Team 7's flaws. Their unity was ash, scattered like the leaves at his feet. Asuma exhaled smoke and announced that time was up, flicking his cigarette into a puddle. He acknowledged that they had kept the scroll and noted that it was not bad for a first attempt. Sasuke straightened, his fist tight around the scroll's hiding spot, wary and expecting a catch as sweat stung a shallow cut on his arm from Asuma's wind technique. Asuma chuckled, scratched his beard, and told them that pass or fail was not the point yet, leaving the decision to Kakashi. He tilted his head, looked at Sakura, and observed that the three of them had fought like strangers. Asuma told Sasuke that he was skilled but had abandoned his team. Sasuke clenched his jaw and remained silent. Naruto landed with an eerie grace, a grave marker tucked under his arm. He teased Sasuke not to be so grumpy and claimed they had had fun, his high, piercing giggle accompanying the motion as he adjusted his scarf and let his lockets glint. He caught Asuma's eye and, with a sly twinkle replacing the chartreuse glow, noted that the bearded man had tricks and that the knives were shiny. Asuma's grin twitched with curiosity. He had not expected the grave marker to stop wind chakra or pierce bark like steel. The speed and strength it implied did not fit the lazy reputation Naruto had at the academy. Asuma asked where Naruto had learned to use those sticks while lighting a cigarette, his tone casual but watchful. Naruto tilted his head, his scars catching the dawn light and his grin widening as he said the grave markers had been found in graveyards full of neat things. His giggle followed as he spun the marker. Sakura shivered, remembering his expression during the fight. His eyes and laugh unsettled her. Sasuke's glance grew colder as he catalogued Naruto's skill and let distrust sharpen into resolve. Asuma let it go for the moment, exhaling smoke and then speaking plainly about the team. He reminded them that holding the scroll was one thing but forming a team was another. He told Sakura that she was smart and needed to use her knowledge rather than only talking, and he warned Sasuke that talent meant nothing if he remained a lone wolf. He spoke directly to Naruto, telling him to stop playing games because Asuma believed Naruto was better than he acted. He tapped his temple to indicate he saw more than Naruto let on. Sakura nodded and bit her lip, promising herself to train harder. Sasuke's low sound hinted at shame he had guarded the scroll but felt the weight of Asuma's words. Naruto grinned and twirled the grave marker, the lockets clinking like a secret vow. He murmured that games were life and moved his thoughts to the others' chakra signatures and fears as notes for his lair, where darker plans waited. The forest closed around his laugh and the graves of Konoha seemed to stir beneath an unseen gaze. Asuma waved them off toward the trees and mentioned that Kakashi would deliver the verdict. He added a light jab about not losing the straw hat next time, nodding toward it half buried in ash. Then he vanished into the rustle of leaves, leaving Team 7 alone. The trio stood amid the wreckage. Naruto hummed a tune too old for his years as Sasuke shoved the scroll deeper into his pouch and walked off with his pride bruised. Sakura followed, muttering apologies and feeling a shaky but growing resolve. Naruto lingered to retrieve the grave marker and traced the sutras with his fingers before whispering that the day's story would please his guests. Chapter 3: The Jonin's Verdict. The Drunken Leaf, a bar in Konoha's quieter district, hummed with off-duty shinobi. Lanterns cast flickers over worn tables and the air carried the tang of sake and grilled meat. For Jonin occupied a corner booth, their exhaustion and camaraderie evident after a day of testing genin teams. Kakashi Hatake slouched against the wall, mask up and one eye half-lidded over a cup of sake. Sima Sartobi nursed a cigarette and a bottle, smoke curling as he spoke. Kurina Yuhi sat poised with rice wine in hand, her crimson eyes sharp despite the late hour. Might Guy, ever energetic, wore a wide grin and a gleaming bowl cut, his towering mug untouched. The tests were done, and now came the reckoning, what each team had revealed. Asuma leaned back and, exhaling smoke, began his report on Team 7. He described Sasuke as skilled and dangerous in his own right, good shuriken jutsu, effective traps, and a biting fire technique that had scorched much of the clearing. But Asuma emphasized that Sasuke fought like a lone wolf and had left Sakura exposed while ignoring Naruto's peculiar behavior. He called Sakura book-smart and determined, able to suggest plans and decoys, but weak in combat and prone to panic when pressured. He praised her heart and potential even while noting her current shortcomings. Might Guy interjected with optimism about Sakura's future, and Asuma dismissed the interruption to return to his assessment of Naruto. Asuma framed Naruto as a puzzling presence who played the clown and giggled, tossing strange grave markers. Those markers were unexpectedly sturdy, able to block weapons and alter the flow of the fight, and Naruto moved with surprising speed and strength. But Asuma suspected Naruto was holding back. Many moves felt deliberate and disguised by antics, and Asuma believed Naruto had interfered with Sakura once. In Asuma's view, the team had scraped by holding the scroll but lacked unity, Sasuke's ego, Sakura's inexperience, and Naruto's games. He concluded that, on a pure talent basis, Sasuke warranted passing, Sakura might grow, and Naruto was too unpredictable to dismiss. Kakashi listened and then turned the conversation to Team 8, his former students. He explained his bell test. 2 bells, 1 hour, required teamwork. He reported that Hinata's Byakugan had spotted traps early and had saved Kiba from a pitfall. Her taijutsu was gentle but she could land a solid strike when given the chance, though she needed confidence. Kiba had demonstrated brawling strength and a keen nose with Akamaru at his side but had been reckless and loud. Shino had acted as the calm anchor, using insect techniques to track and nearly pin Kakashi. He was quiet and tactical but slow to take the lead. Kakashi noted that, while they failed to take the bells, the three had shared ideas and covered each other's backs, showing coordination that impressed him more than Team 7's performance. Kakashi judged that he would pass them, noting that Shino had a brain, Hinata had eyes, and Kiba had guts, and that they would gel with time. Kurenai nodded, satisfied, then set her glass down. Kurenai announced that it was her turn to report on Team 10, Ino, Shikamaru, and Choji. She explained that she had run a genjutsu test, trapping them in an illusion to see how they broke out or worked together, and she acknowledged that Asuma knew these three. She smiled, though a glint of frustration remained in her eyes. Asuma grinned and leaned back, asking how his slackers had done. Kurenai described Shikamaru as a genius who saw through her genjutsu in 10 minutes, analyzing shadow distortions to spot the illusion. She noted that he had not bothered to fight and had instead talked Ino and Choji through it, but added that he was lazy and had barely moved until she pushed him. Kurenai said that Ino had spirit, a mind transfer jutsu that was shaky but promising, and quickness with kunai, though she remained too focused on her hair and bickered with Shikamaru nonstop. Kurenai described Choji as solid, strong in taijutsu with a good heart, but too reliant on the others and prone to freezing when Ino raised her voice. She concluded that they had barely cracked the illusion because Shikamaru had dragged them along. The teamwork existed but was messy, and she would pass them because Shikamaru's intellect outweighed the others' flaws and Ino and Choji would catch up under his lead. Asuma laughed and raised his bottle, proud of the assessment and confident that Shikamaru would complain but deliver. Guy could not hold back and leaped to his feet with arms wide, proclaiming loudly that his team was the blazing pinnacle of Konoha's youth. He boasted that Lee, Niji, and Tenten had been genin nearly a year and were unmatched. Lee's taijutsu could shatter mountains, Niji's Byakugan saw everything and his gentle fist was unstoppable, and Tenten's weapons rained like a storm. Guy claimed they would have snatched the bells, burned through illusions, and guarded any scroll like a fortress. He struck a dramatic pose, nearly toppling the table. Kakashi rolled his visible eye and told Guy that his team was not up for review and that he should sit down. Guy ignored him, clenching his fist and continuing to praise their performance with exaggerated examples. Kurenai smirked and remarked that they were good but not perfect, mentioning that she had seen Lee trip during a spar last month. Guy gasped and dismissed the stumble as nothing more than youthful energy. Asuma waved away Guy's enthusiasm and called the meeting back to business. Asuma then glanced at Kakashi and asked about Team Kakashi leaned forward, tea steaming, and assessed that Sasuke had an edge but would fail if he remained solo. He said Sakura's intelligence might save her if she toughened up, and he expressed concern about Naruto. Kakashi described Naruto as a mess with something there, noting that the grave markers, Sotoba, had been a troubling element and that he would keep an eye on the boy. He decided to pass Team 7 for the moment but emphasized the need to mold them before problems arose. Kurenai agreed and reiterated that Team 10 passed too, with Shikamaru acting as the glue while Ino and Choji needed pushing but would make it. Kakashi raised his cup in a mock toast and affirmed that Team 8 was in. Hinata's spark required encouragement, Kiba needed direction, and Shino was solid. Asuma poured another round and observed that 3 teams meant 3 headaches, and the Jonin clinked drinks. Outside, Konoha slept, unaware of the shadows its new genin already cast. Chapter 4. Whispers of Graves and Treachery. Konoha basked in the golden haze of late afternoon, its streets pulsing with life as vendors haggled, children darted through alleys, and shinobi wove through the crowds with headbands glinting. High above the village in the Hokage's office, the air carried the weight of decisions. The room, lined with scrolls and shelves, smelled faintly of ink and old wood. Hiruzen Sarutobi, the third Hokage, sat behind his desk with a smoldering pipe and a weathered face that showed a calm earned by long experience. Before him stood 3 Jonin Kakashi Hatake, Asuma Sarutobi, and Kurenai Yuhi reporting on their swapped genin tests in steady voices tinged with the responsibility of shaping Konoha's future. Asuma spoke first, leaning casually against a wall and keeping his cigarette unlit out of respect for the office. He recounted Team 7 Sasuke, Sakura, and Naruto and said that while they had kept the scroll he threw at them, their teamwork was lacking. He compared their cooperation to asking a cat to herd mice. Asuma described Sasuke as a one-man army with sharp shuriken skills and solid fire techniques who had left Sakura unsupported and barely acknowledged Naruto. He warned that Sasuke's independent streak would lead to trouble if the boy did not learn to share the load. Hiruzen puffed his pipe and asked about Sakura. Asuma grimaced and said that Sakura's intelligence was her best weapon. She had offered decent plans and decoy ideas straight from the academy books, but she failed in combat, unable to land a kunai and prone to freezing when pressured. He judged that she had the heart but remained a liability until she could toughen up. Hiruzen accepted that she needed time and moved on to ask about Naruto. Asuma's grin faded and his tone sharpened when he spoke of Naruto. He described the boy as unpredictable, playing the fool and giggling while using grave markers, sotoba, carved with sutras. Asuma noted that those markers were resilient, had blocked his wind chakra, and struck like hardened wood. He observed that Naruto moved like a ghost through branches and showed speed and strength, but much of his behavior felt staged, as if he was testing the Jonin rather than engaging as a teammate. Asuma added that Naruto had accidentally tripped Sakura and interfered with Sasuke's traps, indicating a lack of team spirit and a focus on his own game. Hiruzen's eyes narrowed as the mention of Sotoba stirred an old memory, a small boy years earlier, kneeling by Konoha's graves and whispering, who had once been misunderstood by villagers. The recollection of that sorrowful scene made him uneasy, and he murmured that Naruto and graves were not a new combination. Kakashi, slouched by the window with his mask hiding all but one eye, observed that Naruto had always been odd and suggested that the grave markers might be more than a quirk. He noted that the boy's hidden skills deserved attention. Kurenai then stood to report on team. She described the genjutsu test she had used to trap them in an illusion and said that Shikamaru had cracked it quickly by spotting shadow distortions, though he only acted when pushed. Kurenai characterized Ino as fiery and competent with kunai, with a developing mind transfer technique and a vanity that distracted her, and Choji as a strong, loyal fighter who hesitated without direction. She confirmed that they had escaped thanks to Shikamaru's leadership and that the team's cooperation, while fragile, justified passing them. Asuma expressed pride in his students and reiterated that Shikamaru would complain but ultimately deliver. Kakashi went last and assessed Team 8 Hinata, Kiba, and Shino. He recounted a bell test with 2 bells and an hour to retrieve them. Although no bells had been taken, the team had tried. He said that Hinata's Byakugan had detected traps and saved Kiba from a fall, revealing a quiet steel beneath her softness that needed encouragement. Kakashi described Kiba as a reckless brawler with a keen nose but sloppy technique, and Shino as the brain who had nearly cornered him with insects but lacked the voice to lead. He noted that they had shared plans and covered one another's flanks, and that their coordination was cleaner than Team 7's. The Jonin finished their reports, each assessment a small piece in the larger task of guiding Konoha's next generation. A council member told the group to pass them, believing Hinata's perception, Kiba's courage, and Shino's tactics would develop. Hiruzen exhaled smoke, nodded slowly, and told them to pass all 3 teams and mold them carefully because the Leaf Village needed their strength without fractures. His gaze lingered on Kakashi as he warned Kakashi to watch Naruto's memorial marker. Graves did not speak lightly. The warning hung heavy as pipe smoke while the high-ranking ninja bowed and left, the door clicking shut behind them. Dusk painted the Leaf Village streets in amber and shadow. The bustle softened as villagers headed home. Naruto Uzumaki sat on a weathered bench by the market square, pale blonde hair spilling over his crooked conical straw hat, a single braid swaying as he giggled at passers-by. A vendor flinched, clutching her basket and muttering a slur under her breath as Naruto's high, jagged laugh followed. An old man hurried past, avoiding eye contact, his steps quickening at the sight of Naruto's black fingernails twirling a prayer bead. A group of children froze mid-game, one whispering that he was a demon before their mother pulled them away, shooting Naruto a glare. His giggle sharpened as he relished their fear like someone entertained by others' unease. A mid-ranking ninja named Mizuki approached, his silver hair and practiced smile steady, though his eyes were sharp. Mizuki sat beside Naruto and asked how the rookie ninja exam had gone. Naruto's grin faltered into a theatrical pout, eyes wide with feigned tears as he complained about the exam, mocking his teammates and playing for sympathy. Mizuki's smile tightened at the opening and he leaned closer, suggesting there was a way to skip the rookie path and jump straight to higher rank if Naruto helped steal a forbidden scroll kept in the village leader's office. Mizuki framed the theft as a shortcut to fame and power. Naruto's pout vanished and curiosity brightened his face. He agreed eagerly, but his eyes flashed with a predatory glint as he sensed Mizuki's greed and lie. Mizuki, ensuring no one was listening, arranged to meet at the old shrine in the forest at midnight and disappeared into the crowd. Naruto was left alone, his giggle echoing with a darker promise than Mizuki could imagine. Midnight cloaked the forest and the old shrine sat under starlight, its gate leaning and stone steps moss-choked. Naruto waited on a cracked altar, his blonde hair glowing faintly beneath his conical hat, and his grin replaced by a cold, watchful stare. Mizuki emerged from the trees, smug, a throwing dagger in hand, and demanded the scroll. Naruto mockingly told Mizuki that he had forgotten the scroll and that he did not have it. Mizuki, furious, told Naruto not to play games and lunged with a dagger aimed at Naruto's throat. Naruto moved with uncanny speed, dodging and using his wooden memorial marker to disarm Mizuki, who stumbled and clutched his arm. Naruto's high, chilling giggle filled the shrine as he taunted Mizuki about who he was really working for. Mizuki attacked again, throwing a small blade, but Naruto batted it aside and kept advancing. The encounter unfolded like an exaggerated, stylized battle. Naruto used fluid, precise motions with his wooden marker, striking to disable rather than to maim in graphic detail. He landed blows that sent Mizuki to the ground and prevented any further attack. Mizuki cried out and fell, his energy spent, and he lay motionless. Naruto moved closer, watched Mizuki's life in a shimmering record of memories, and saw the layers of deceit, betrayals, and a shadowed meeting with Orochimaru that explained Mizuki's plot. Naruto's expression shifted between disgust and curiosity at the revelations. Using a forbidden skill, Naruto altered the recorded memories, then used an old, uncanny technique to animate Mizuki's body into a lifeless, obedient puppet. Naruto commented softly that it was not his best work but that Mizuki would do for now. The shrine fell silent. Dawn painted the Leaf Village in soft pinks and the village stirred, unaware of the events at the shrine, as the high-ranking ninja visited their rookie ninja to deliver verdicts. Kakashi went to Sakura's modest home and informed Sakura that she had passed. He cautioned her not to celebrate too soon, bluntly warning that despite her intelligence she could be a liability if she continued to trip, miss throws, or freeze under pressure, because the village could not carry dead weight. Sakura's relief dimmed and her resolve hardened as she promised to improve. Kakashi then sought Sasuke at the Uchiha compound where Sasuke was training alone. Kakashi told Sasuke that he had passed as well while stepping into view, his mask hiding his expression. Kakashi praised Sasuke's traps as solid and his fire jutsu as sharp, but he warned that a single shinobi was not an army and that ignoring one's team was a death sentence. Sasuke's jaw tightened and his fingers twitched as he insisted he did not need them. Kakashi tilted his head and warned that thinking that way would bury him. He left without another word, smoke curling where he stood while Sasuke's shuriken struck the target harder, spiderwebbing cracks across the wood. Kakashi visited Naruto's apartment on the edge of Konoha, a cramped building with peeling paint and dim windows. He entered to find the room sparse, with a rickety table, a single chair, and a polished black coffin in the corner whose lid was carved with faint sutras and gleamed like a shrine. Naruto sat cross-legged on the floor with his pale hair loose and a scarf pulled around him, offering a plate of biscuits and a steaming teapot. He cheerfully presented the snacks and treated the coffin with an odd familiarity, patting it as if it were a pet and joking that it kept nightmares comfortable. Kakashi's gaze lingered uneasily on the coffin. Naruto laughed, his eyes bright but edged with something unsettling. Kakashi declined the tea, sitting on the chair with his mask unmoving, and remarked that the decor was not what he'd expected. He informed Naruto that he had passed the assessment, relaying Asuma's report that Naruto had been fast and strong and had impressed with his memorial markers that behaved almost like steel. Kakashi also relayed concern that Naruto might be holding back and had sabotaged Sakura, asking for an explanation. Naruto laughed and claimed he was just having fun, saying his markers were simple sticks he had found and that Sakura's trip was just clumsiness. Kakashi noted that the sticks had acted like steel and warned that Asuma had said Naruto was not a team player. He instructed Naruto to fix that or he would pull everyone down. Naruto promised to be more of a team player and offered more biscuits, but Kakashi declined, asked him to keep the biscuits, and suggested rethinking the coffin because it did not convey team spirit. Kakashi vanished in smoke, leaving Naruto alone as his laugh echoed in the dim room and the coffin's sutras pulsed faintly. The sun climbed higher over Konoha and the village's rhythm continued, but in the shadows the graves, the forests, the boy's apartment Naruto's laugh lingered and a promise of change threaded through the village's beat. Naruto sat sipping tea while his memorial stakes were stacked neatly by the coffin, each one another step toward a world where death bent to his will. Chapter 5: Giggles, Graves and Growing Shadows. The weeks after Team 7's formation settled into a deceptively mundane rhythm of D-rank missions and team training. Sakura Haruno practiced kunai throws until her palms blistered, Sasuke Uchiha pushed his fire jutsu to new scorching heights, and Naruto Uzumaki wove a far more intricate, shadowy pattern beneath the surface. Unknown to his teammates or their perpetually late sensei, Naruto had struck a deal with the grumpy nine-tailed fox spirits sealed within him. Kurama initially objected to being treated like a chakra well for Naruto, who had an unsettling fascination with death, but had been swayed by Naruto's clever offer of regular amusement in exchange for a few useful techniques. The most useful so far was the Shadow Clone Jutsu. While a perfectly crafted Naruto clone, complete with the same unsettling giggle and a Kurama-inspired fondness for chasing cats up trees to lend authenticity, took on mundane chores and missions pulling weeds, painting fences, and walking dogs, the real Naruto moved through Konoha's underbelly disguised as a plain, forgettable mortician's apprentice. In that persona, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who belonged in the margins. Mizuki had become a surprisingly versatile, if dim-witted, tool under Naruto's manipulation. Reprogrammed and given edited memories, Mizuki Doll followed a simple directive to cause minor, untraceable chaos and sow unease without revealing who controlled him, and he carried out that directive with disturbing efficiency. One afternoon, a loud boom echoed from the direction of the academy, sending merchants and students into a brief panic. The explosion was small, mostly smoke and scattered paper, but it announced that someone was playing games. A figure resembling Mizuki made a jerky, almost comical retreat, then tripped over a loose cobblestone and dropped a single unsigned note before vanishing into the chaos. Naruto, disguised and watching from a rooftop, nearly choked on a biscuit with laughter. Another evening, ANBU headquarters found itself dealing with an unexpected amphibian infestation, hundreds of frogs appearing in ventilation S and filing cabinets, even in the captain's private tea set. ANBU, normally stoic and controlled, were flustered by the spectacle as they corralled frogs into temporary containment. Mizuki Doll had collected the frogs over several days, his edited memories giving him an almost childlike delight in the task, a strange contrast to the blankness behind his reanimated eyes. Naruto took pleasure in these small pranks. Individually they were minor irritations, but they chipped at Konoha's sense of security, creating tiny cracks in the village's facade. Each incident was a pebble dropped into a still pond, ripples that spread and were noticed by few but understood by the grinning shadow orchestrating them. Kaido proved more useful than Naruto had first expected. Years spent burying the village's fallen, many of whom had kept unofficial dealings, had given Kaito a network of whispers and shadows. With a touch of Naruto's unsettling charm and a steady supply of Kaido's preferred cheap sake, Kaito had reluctantly introduced Naruto's black-haired apprentice persona to a nervous man named Goro, a low-level functionary in Konoha's clandestine bounty network. The organization ran out of a tangle of cellars beneath a dilapidated ramen stall in the Fire Country, handling bounties with untraceable Rio and a policy of asking no questions. Naruto, in his unassuming disguise, saw an opportunity. These people dealt in the disposal and redistribution of lives, and in his mind they were a kind of colleague. He thought, with quiet amusement, that colleagues should be well managed. Over several weeks, Naruto, as the quiet apprentice, systematically reshaped the organization from the inside. He engineered disappearances and staged accidents, guided personnel changes, and then reviewed each member's records to fold their altered status into the network. After a particularly vivid, haunting dream that left their boss, Big Kenji, rattled and erratic, the fat, dismissive man who had once called Naruto Kaido's charity case found himself promoting the efficient, inscrutable boy. Before long, the entire bounty network answered to a black-haired apprentice whose smile rarely reached his eyes and whose calm requests carried the weight of unspoken threats. One afternoon, with the cellar thick with the smell of stale beer and an undercurrent of fear, the bell over the hidden entrance chimed. Two figures descended the rickety stairs, their silhouettes radiating menace. Naruto, perched on a crate and idly polishing a silver nameplate, looked up with a placid expression. The first figure was tall, with slicked-back gray hair, wild purple eyes, and a manic grin that echoed Naruto's own unsettling amusement. He wore a dark cloak open to reveal a cultist amulet and carried a massive triple-bladed scythe. This was Haydn. The second figure was taller still, face obscured by a hood and mask, only green eyes visible. He moved with cold, practical purpose and carried a sack on his back. This was Kakuzu. Haydn shouted that they had a fresh DLVRY for their boss and demanded to know where Kenji was, insisting their lord required a swift transaction. He gestured with his scythe in a careless show of force that sent a clerk ducking behind a ledger. Kakuzu grunted and nudged Haydn forward, warning him to be quiet and reminding him that they were there for payment, not a sermon. Naruto stepped down from the crate with surprisingly graceful movements and offered a polite bow, explaining that Kenji was indisposed and that he was handling transactions that day. He asked them to present their contribution. Haydn dumped a large burlap sack onto the counter without ceremony. A muffled sound came from within. He described the catch as a loud-mouthed monk from the fire temple who had been persistent about peace and inner harmony, and said their lord had found the monk wanting. Kakuzu confirmed that the bounty required a live DLVY and that payment was 2 million ryo, no haggling. Naruto inspected the sack and remarked that a live arrival was always more engaging, circling it slowly with a faint smile. Haydn, suspicious and intrigued, asked whether the boy actually enjoyed this work. Naruto laughed and said that, for him, it was a passion and that every arrival carried a unique story, some were more talkative than others. Kuzu, impatient, reminded them to settle the payment. A bizarre doll teller began counting out stacks of ryo, and Naruto noted that patience was a virtue even if their lord did not always favor it. Haydn warned Naruto not to disrespect their lord and spoke of the cult's promise of a different kind of life through sacrifice. Naruto showed a curious interest in that promise and gestured toward Kakuzu's visible stitches, asking about unusual arrangements in professional terms. Kakuzu narrowed his eyes and told Naruto that his affairs were none of the boy's concern. Naruto offered a not-quite-sincere apology and explained that his interest was professional. In guest services they often encountered unusual anatomical arrangements. The teller finished counting and placed several heavy bags of ryo on the counter. Kakuzu swept them up with quick hands and confirmed the payment, then turned to leave. Haydn, lingering, regarded Naruto as odd and suggested that their lord might put someone with that strange enthusiasm to use. Naruto introduced himself as Kuro, a humble apprentice learning the trade, and said he enjoyed meeting people with such strong convictions. Haydn grunted, warned them to keep the monk from causing trouble, and expressed a preference for more exciting targets next time. The two of them laughed and argued about whose turn it would be to choose the next bounty as they climbed the stairs and exited. After they left, Naruto watched them go and for a fleeting second his eyes shimmered with a chartreuse light. He murmured that Haydn and Kazu would make delightful research subjects someday. He turned his attention back to the sack on the counter and moved his gloved fingers to probe its contents, intending to learn what the newcomer might reveal. A soft, unsettling giggle escaped him as muffled sounds continued from within the burlap. Later, Naruto found himself wandering near the Konoha Memorial Stone. Today a whim had drawn him to the quieter, older sections of the cemetery where the forgotten rested. He was tracing the faded inscription on a lesser-known hero's marker, his lockets clinking softly, when he sensed a familiar presence. Kakashi Hatake stood a short distance away, his single visible eye fixed on two specific names carved into the main cenotaph: Minato Namikaze and Kushina Uzumaki. There was a rare softness in his posture, a quiet sorrow that even his mask could not fully conceal. Naruto, his straw hat tilted low, approached with his usual unsettling grace and made a sudden teasing sound, his giggle startling Kakashi out of reverie. Kakashi straightened and asked what Naruto was doing there. Naruto shrugged, his gray scarf swaying, and said he was simply admiring the many names and the quiet visitors. He gestured toward the stones, then fixed his gaze on the two names Kakashi had been observing and asked about Minato Namikaze and Kushina Uzumaki, wondering aloud if they had been popular. Kakashi's visible eye hardened almost imperceptibly as he described them as great shinobi and heroes of Konoha, keeping his voice flat and clinical. Naruto continued with a flippant curiosity about whether their lives were dramatic storybook adventures or quiet ends like the other names here, punctuating his questions with nervous giggles. Kakashi explained briefly and respectfully that they had sacrificed themselves to protect the village during the Nine-Tails attack. Naruto treated it lightly at first, commenting that he had heard it had been quite an event and probing for more, whether they had been important, whether they used impressive techniques, and whether they had left behind interesting keepsakes. His curiosity carried an odd, morbid edge, and Kakashi felt the weight of what telling the truth would mean. He recognized with chilling certainty that revealing these were Naruto's parents would be a monumental mistake. The thought of what this peculiar, death-obsessed boy might do with that knowledge filled Kakashi with dread. Kakashi kept his response neutral and focused on their skills and their sacrifice, emphasizing that their legacy was their will to protect Konoha and not something to be collected. Naruto pouted theatrically and then, with a sly grin, hinted at the idea of restless spirits and asked where they went when the lights went out, whether they waited for a friendly face or something else. His words carried a teasing darkness and a faint metallic note to his breath that unnerved Kakashi. Kakashi took a step back and firmly told Naruto to show respect. Naruto replied that he always respected his quiet guests because they had the best secrets, then gave a final lingering look at the names on the stone and bounded away, his robe swirling and his lockets clinking as his laughter echoed among the tombstones. Kakashi remained alone, the weight of unspoken truths and a growing dread settling heavily on him. He glanced back at Minato and Kushina's names and silently vowed to protect their son, even if it meant protecting him from himself. He wondered, with a wry thought, whether it was time to carry more than just his romance novels on missions, perhaps a vial of holy water or at the very least a very large net. Chapter 6. A Reaper's Audition. The air in the bounty station cellar was, as usual, a stagnant mix of stale sake and faint antiseptic notes. The bizarre doll clerks stood unnaturally still at their posts, arranged like forgotten statues. The real Naruto, disguised under the plain features and black hair of Kuro, was idly arranging a set of small polished tokens on the counter when the bell above the hidden entrance chimed. Haiden and Kazu descended the rickety wooden stairs, their presence immediately dominating the cramped space. Haiden's massive scythe scraped against a ceiling beam, sending dust and splinters falling to the floor. Haiden slammed a bound bundle onto the counter with a thud that made the wooden structure groan and announced their return in a booming voice, demanding payment before he made trouble. Kakuzu pushed him aside and complained that the subject had been worth more alive. Kuro offered a placid smile and greeted them, indicating a fee of 3 million ryo. As the doll robotically stacked coins, Kuro leaned forward and proposed joining their organization. The seller fell silent. Haiden erupted into a roar of incredulous laughter at the idea of the strange boy wanting to join the Akatsuki. Kakuzu's stitched eyes narrowed as he pointed out that they did not recruit nameless foundlings from back-alley cellars and that their members were S-rank missing Nin, questioning what Kuro was and how old he was. Kuro's smile did not waver as he stated his age and then, more importantly, clarified that his age and name were irrelevant and that his skills were what mattered. He explained calmly that he wished to collect the interesting guests their organization encountered, insisting this was his life's work. The word collect sobered Haiden instantly. He snapped that they did not collect people like objects, insulted and enraged and moved. His scythe was a blur, a silver streak aimed not just at the boy but to cleave the entire counter in two. Everything changed in an instant. The air dropped 20 degrees and an unnatural aura flooded the room. Kuro's smile turned predatory and knowing, a grin that did not belong on a child's face. He raised a hand and a tear in reality opened beside him, green light casting long shadows that made the bizarre dolls look unnervingly animated. The skeletal handle of a death scythe slid out and Kuro caught it with eerie grace. Hayden's scythe crashed down with a ringing impact that sent a concussive shockwave through the cellar. Bottles on the shelves rattled violently before exploding into glass and foul-smelling liquid. Dust rained from the ceiling and a spiderweb of cracks appeared in the stone floor. The sound hit them like a physical blow in the confined space. Kuro's tone shifted into a high, lilting tenor and he mocked Hayden for his temper. Hayden stumbled back, shock and fury on his face. Kuro vaulted onto the counter, the old wood groaning, then used a stone support pillar to pivot away from a follow-up strike. Kakuzu reacted instantly, his arm extending in a blur of stitches and threads as he ordered Hayden not to kill the boy because the body might be valuable. One of Kakuzu's threads, missing its primary target as Kuro dodged, speared through a nearby bizarre doll clerk. There was no spray of blood, only the dry rustle of packed straw and fabric being torn. The doll slumped, impaled and still, a silent testament to the unnatural workforce. Kuro laughed and called them wonderful toys. The fight turned the cellar into a dangerous maze. Hayden's wild, sweeping attacks were devastating in the tight quarters. One swing missed Kuro but shattered 3 large storage barrels, sending a thick dark fluid oozing across the floor. Kakuzu's threads formed a web, firing from walls and ceiling to force Kuro into Hayden's path. Kuro used the chaos. He slid on the slick fluid to dodge under a thread, then kicked a broken barrel stave into Hayden's shins to disrupt his footing. He spun, his death scythe carving a deep, shimmering gouge in the stone wall to avoid Hayden's blade, the impact showering the room with rock chips. The bizarre dolls, caught in the crossfire, were torn apart, one destroyed by Hayden, another sliced by Kakuzu's threads, their inner mechanisms exposed. Kuro saw his opening. As Hayden slipped on the slick floor during a reckless lunge, Kuro dropped low and swept upward, the blade grazing Hayden's arm and drawing a thin line of blood. Kuro's grin widened into something truly terrifying. He flipped backward to land lightly on the wreckage of the counter, his brown eyes seeming to glow from within. Kuro observed with a sharp, amused tone that all the blood and screaming were wonderfully theatrical and compared it to a messy ritual in an abandoned temple, noting that the villagers' screaming had been off-key. Hayden froze mid-stride, disbelief and horror on his face as he demanded to know how Kuro could know that. Kakuzu pulled his threads back and surveyed the devastation with glowing eyes. The cellar was a wreck, the counter splintered in 2, barrels reduced to staves, the floor a treacherous mix of slick fluid and debris, and the air thick with dust and vaporized chemicals. His own bizarre doll workforce lay in pieces. The boy had not only fought them, he had turned the territory into a weapon and dismantled them with it. Kakuzu stepped in front of the stunned Hayden and announced that the fight was over, then asked what they wanted. Kuro's terrifying presence faded. The death scythe retracted into its rift of green light and the boy hopped off the ruined counter, once again appearing as an unassuming 12-year-old. He spoke softly that he wanted to join, offering unique talents, power, and a special skill for preservation, and indicated that he could ensure bounties were always delivered in perfect condition. Kakuzu stood silent amid the proof of the boy's power, recognizing that this was more than an asset. It was a force of nature contained in a child's body. Kakuzu finally said that their leader, Pain, decided who joined. Small, featureless black token onto the remaining piece of the counter and explained that the boy should present it at the tallest tower in Amigakure when the rains never stopped. If he was worthy he would be tested, and if not he would die. Kakuzu grabbed the bags of money and dragged the still muttering Hayden up the stairs, complaining that the place was bad for his finances. As their footsteps faded, Naruto picked up the token and looked at the wrecked cellar, seeing the wreckage as a canvas of the boy's power. He giggled, a low, contented sound, and whispered to the remains of his bizarre doll clerks that it had been a first-rate laugh. Chapter 7. A Ripple in the Red Clouds. The air in the cave was cold and smelled of wet stone and the faint scent of the preserved samurai in the corner. Water dripped from a stalactite into a murky puddle with a maddeningly slow, rhythmic plink. Haydn sat cross-legged on a flat rock, his triple-bladed scythe leaning against the damp wall beside him. He was bored in a way that gnawed at him. Across the small cavern, Kakuzu sat motionless with eyes closed in the meditative pose required for the astral projection technique. To anyone else he would appear dead. Haydn knew better. Kakuzu was miles away, projected into a secret meeting with the rest of their organization, and Haydn, apostle of Lord Jashin, was stuck on guard duty. Haydn muttered that the situation was absolutely ridiculous as he kicked a loose stone. It skittered across the floor and bounced off Kakuzu's unmoving leg. His thoughts drifted back to the cellar in Kajiro Town and to the black-haired boy. He spat the name Kuro like a curse, feeling a shiver he would deny to his dying breath. It was not just the power that unnerved him, it was the way the boy had looked at him, the giggling voice on a face that knew things no one should. Haydn's hand tightened into a fist. He replayed the fight 100 times in his head. The impossible clang of that skeletal scythe against his own. The boy's movements, a ghostly dance less like taijutsu and more like a leaf caught in a deathly wind. But there was something else he could not shake. Haydn grumbled to himself that the kid was half blind. He remembered the boy squinting slightly when he had first presented the bounty, tilting his head as if trying to get a better look. During the fight, the movements had been pure instinct, almost supernatural, but in the brief pauses Haydn recalled the kid almost stumbling over a piece of debris, correcting himself only at the last second. In the empty cave Haydn ranted that the boy moved like a demon yet could not see the hand in front of his face, calling him pathetic and laughing at the thought. The idea made the boy less of an unknowable horror and more of a flawed, killable target, one he desperately wanted to face again. Far above, in a darker, larger cavern, the astral projections of the Akatsuki flickered into existence on the spectral fingers of the ghetto statue. Rain fell on Pain's projection, a constant reminder of his domain in Amidst. The air felt heavy with unspoken power. Pain raised his voice in a flat, commanding tone and ordered Kakuzu to report. Kakuzu bowed his head slightly and explained that there had been a development. Haydn and he had encountered an individual who had expressed a desire to join the Akatsuki. Deidara shifted, his blonde hair obscuring one eye, and dismissed the notion that the group was a charity. Kakuzu, however, clarified that the individual was unique. He reported that the new handler of the Kajiro Town bounty station called himself Kuro and that he was 12 years old. Kisame responded with a low, rumbling chuckle at the age, but Kakuzu warned that the boy was not to be underestimated. He described how the boy had moved with S-rank speed and strength, summoned a weapon that appeared to be a scythe of bone and silver radiating an unnatural energy, and fought Haydn and Kakuzu to a standstill in close quarters. Sasori, from within his Hirako puppet, noted the surprising report that a 12-year-old had held off them, while Kakuzu continued without missing a beat. He recalled the most significant detail. With a single, shallow cut on Haydn's arm, the boy had been able to recount, in detail, a private foundational event from Haydn's past, an event no living person should have known. The atmosphere shifted. Itachi, who had remained silent and motionless, focused on Kakuzu with a flicker of analytical interest. Zetsu's two halves remarked that the Kajiro station had been quiet lately, that a change in management had been noted, and that the new leader had left no records, an intriguing anomaly. Sasori mused that the ability to read the past with a touch might be a unique jutsu or a Kekkei Genkai, a powerful intelligence-gathering tool worth preserving. Kakuzu added that the boy also displayed a peculiar flaw. Despite guiding his movements with what seemed like supernatural instinct, he appeared to have a severe visual impairment, squinting at stationary objects. Deidara snorted and mocked the idea, while Kisame grinned at the prospect of fighting such an unpredictable opponent. Pain raised a hand and silenced the chatter. He declared that the ability to read a soul's history was of great interest and that Kakuzu's invitation for a test would be accepted. Pain ordered that the boy be brought to Amidst and that he would test him personally. If the boy possessed the power described, he would become a valuable asset. If not, the consequences would be final. With that, The meeting concluded and the projections flickered and vanished one by one, leaving the cavern to its silence. Back in the damp cave, Kakuzu's body stirred and his eyes opened, glowing green in the gloom. Haydn, who had been trying to balance his scythe on its tip, spun around and demanded the verdict. Kakuzu rose, stretched his stitched limbs with a series of cracks and pops, and said they would wait. He explained that the boy would come to Amigakure to be tested by pain himself. Haydn's boredom evaporated and a manic, bloodthirsty grin spread across his face. He hefted his massive scythe onto his shoulder and cackled at the idea of a personal test from the big boss, reveling in the chance to see if the boy could handle a real god. He even joked about getting the boy a pair of glasses as a welcome gift if he passed. Chapter 8: An Escort of Monsters. The journey to Amigakure was miserable, painted in 50 shades of gray and smelling of damp earth and rot. Rain drizzled constantly, turning the northern roads of the land of fire into thick, grasping mud that tugged at their sandals with every step. For Haydn it was a special kind of hell, not glorious or bloody, just wet and boring. Haydn groaned repeatedly that he could not wait to arrive, complaining that his cloak was heavy with rain and that his joints felt rusty. Kakuzu trudged ahead with the relentless, unbothered pace of a glacier and told him that his whining wasted energy and time, and therefore money. Bringing up the rear was their new charge. Kuro walked with preternatural silence, his simple black tunic and trousers somehow shedding the worst of the mud. His footsteps were light, almost non-existent. He seemed utterly unfazed by the miserable weather, his head tilted slightly as if listening to a song only he could hear. To any observer, it was a bizarre procession, a grumbling zealot, a walking vault, and a ghost of a boy. When Kuro's foot caught on a thick, gnarled root snaking across the path, he stumbled, arms flailing briefly before catching his balance with an eerie, boneless grace. The misstep was clumsy compared to his usual phantom-like movements. Haydn stopped and, wearing a malicious, triumphant grin, announced that he had been waiting for this and mocked Kuro for nearly falling. Kakuzu responded with a low, deadly growl and reminded Haydn that the asset was to be delivered to Pain alive and intact, that its value dropped if it was broken. Haydn argued that the boy was a pathetic spectacle, deriding the idea of power tied to a blind companion, but he lowered his weapon at Kakuzu's warning. Kuro straightened his tunic, letting out a soft, high-pitched giggle, and tapped the root with his foot, saying through a quiet laugh that even the earth wanted to play. The casual, unbothered response inflamed Haydn, but the group moved on, Haydn fuming in the rain. That night they made a crude camp in a shallow, dripping cave. Ku, pragmatic as ever, had caught several large fish from a nearby stream and roasted them over a fire that hissed in the damp air. Haydn sharpened the blades of his scythe with a whetstone, the rhythmic scrape echoing off the rock. Kuro sat apart near the cave mouth, watching the rain fall. He had not eaten and had not complained, he only watched. Haydn broke the silence with a condescending question about Kuro's plan to join the Akatsuki, scoffing at the idea of a blind boy among Jinchuriki hunters and mocking the notion that Kuro could handle the dangers ahead. Kuro replied with a faint smile and a curious tone, calling Jinchuriki fascinating guests full of energy and stories, and then, turning his attention to Haydn, asked about Jashin and whether the god liked noisy sacrifices. Haydn brightened at the chance to proselytize, describing Jashin as one who revels in the suffering of the faithless and claimed that Jashin rewarded them with immortality so they could carry out his judgment forever. Kuro regarded the idea of eternity calmly, noting that his own guests were quieter and had all the time in the world to tell their stories. Kakuzu paused, fish in hand, and regarded the boy with measured interest. Kuro then asked about the other members of the Akatsuki. Haydn sneered and painted a blunt, irreverent portrait, a puppet user obsessed with art, a loud-mouthed member who favored explosions, a stern aquatic fighter, and their leader Pain, who believed himself a god. Kuro's smile widened at the prospect of meeting someone who thought themselves divine. Before Haydn could continue, a blur of motion in the trees outside the cave mouth drew their attention. A dozen rain-slicked, heavily armed bounty hunters materialized from the downpour, recognizing the Akatsuki cloaks and eager for the reward. Their leader announced that they were Haydn the Immortal and Kazu and declared the bounty on their heads. Hayden's face lit with ecstatic joy at the promise of entertainment. What followed unfolded with the cold efficiency of a stylized battle rather than a chaotic brawl. Hayden moved like a whirlwind, his scythe sweeping in swift, stylized arcs that sent attackers retreating and defeated. His fierce laughter mixed with the cries of the attackers as he fought with brutal enthusiasm. Kakuzu was a force of controlled power, his threads shot out and restrained several assailants at once, and he unleashed a torrent of wind-style jutsu that tore through the trees and scattered the attackers. The scene felt almost like a dark opera. Kuro did not join the fight. He leaned back against the cave wall and watched, studying Hayden's ritualistic movements and cataloging Kakuzu's multi-elemental assaults with cool detachment. He was a spectator, an analyzer. In less than 2 minutes, the attackers were overwhelmed. Only the leader remained, crawling backward through the mud, sword broken and eyes wide with terror. Hayden stood over him with his scythe raised, ready to deliver the final blow. Kuro intervened, stepping forward and kneeling to get level with the terrified man. He commented quietly that the man had very loud friends and reached out to pat the man's cheek, promising in a calm, lilting whisper that the man would make a fine story for his other guests. Kuro then stood and turned away, indicating with a single sentence that they could take the man now. Hayden hesitated for a heartbeat at the boy's casual dismissal, a shiver of something unreadable passing over him. Then he raised his scythe and brought it down, delivering a decisive strike that ended the confrontation. The leader collapsed and lay still. Days later, the drizzle that had settled over the land intensified into a relentless downpour. The world became a cascade of gray, the rain a constant, drumming presence. Through the deluge, a city of impossible structures emerged from the mist. Towers of dark steel weeping with rust and rainwater rose like a forest of industrial spears. Pipes snaked around them like metallic vines, venting steam that mixed with the low-hanging clouds. It was a city that looked like it had drowned in its own tears. Amige cure. Hayden gestured with his scythe and told Kuro that they had arrived at the home of their so-called god, mocking the boy not to trip on his way to the altar. Kuro did not answer. He giggled, a high, sharp sound almost lost in the roar of the rain, his eyes fixed on the tallest, central tower where his test awaited. Chapter 9. The Angel and the Toys. The rain in Amige Cure was different from the drizzle in the Land of Fire. Here it fell like a heavy, industrial curtain, tasting of iron and sorrow. Drummed relentlessly against the steel skyscrapers that pierced the gray clouds, turning the world into a vertical maze of pipes and wet metal. Hayden kicked a puddle, sending murky water splashing onto his cloak, and complained that the place was a depressing dump and wondered aloud how anyone lived here without losing their mind. Kakuzu grunted that people adapted or died and urged them to keep moving. Kuro walked between them, head tilted back, letting the rain wash over his plain face. He was not looking at the buildings so much as at the spaces between them, where the chakra of the city's surveillance rain flowed like a nervous system. He murmured that it felt heavy, as if the sky were crying at a funeral no one attended, and giggled softly. Suddenly, the rain in front of them swirled. Thousands of sheets of paper materialized from the downpour, spiraling together with a soft sound. They folded and interlocked into a pair of great white wings, a body, a face of porcelain stillness. Konan hovered before them, her Akatsuki cloak dry despite the deluge, an amber flower tucked into her blue hair. She regarded them with eyes that gave nothing away. Hayden offered a mocking greeting and remarked that it was about time they saw a familiar face. Kuro stepped forward, shielding his eyes as if the gloom were too bright, and peered at her with a wrinkled nose. He observed that she was made of paper, delighted by the fragility and the way she folded herself into a shape that seemed eternal, and then laughed, wondering aloud, in a childlike way, what would happen if someone struck a match. Konan warned that he spoke boldly for a guest and informed Hayden and Kazu that their escort mission was complete. They were permitted to leave. Hayden bristled and protested that he had traveled for days and wanted to see the boy get tested, insisting he would not be denied the spectacle. Konan considered the risk, glanced toward the tower above, and acknowledged how absolute pain's will was. She permitted them to witness the judgment on the condition that they did not interfere, warning that if they stepped onto the battlefield they would be eliminated along with the boy. Kakuzu accepted the offer for free entertainment as long as they were not expected to clean up the mess. Conan dissolved into a cloud of origami butterflies and drifted upward, guiding Kuro. Haydn grinned, hefted his scythe onto his shoulder, and followed them into the dark belly of the tower, declaring that he wanted a show and not to have the boy die too quickly. They ascended rusted catwalks into the heart of the city's tallest structure. The openness of the sky gave way to a claustrophobic network of massive industrial pipes, valves the size of carriage wheels, and a constant, thrumming vibration of machinery. Steam hissed from vents, filling the air with dense, hot fog that limited visibility. This was the pipe room, the circulatory system of Amigakure. Conan led Kuro to a wide, circular junction where several main conduits intersected, then scattered into paper and drifted up into the shadows of the ceiling. From everywhere and nowhere, she told him to wait. Kuro stood alone at the junction, adjusted his tunic, and reached into his sleeve to pull out a sotoba, a wooden grave marker, which he twirled idly while humming a discordant tune. He called into the steam that it was rude to keep a guest waiting because the tea gets cold. Figures emerged from the shadows of 3 tunnels. To his left, the Preta path walked heavily into the light, short and stocky with a perpetually open mouth. To his right, the Azura path appeared, a bulky, mechanical augmented man with a saw-like tail curling over his shoulder. Directly ahead stood the animal path, a lean man with orange hair tied in a high ponytail and a large bridge piercing across his nose. Kuro stopped twirling his sotoba and leaned forward to inspect the center figure, giggling as he pointed out the missing eyebrows and mockingly commented on the ponytail. He turned to the Azura path and laughed at the way he looked as if assembled from spare parts. A deep, resonant voice vibrated from all 3 bodies at once and warned that the child possessed an arrogant tongue, that he sought to join the Akatsuki, and that in the presence of God all secrets were laid bare. Kuro was told to show his worth or die. The test had begun. The animal path moved first and slammed his hands onto the metal grating of the floor, performing a summoning technique. A massive cloud of white smoke exploded in the confined space. From within, a roar shook the pipes and forced rust loose from the ceiling. A giant multi-headed dog burst forth, its tawny fur blending with the steam and its eyes showing the same rippled Rinnegan pattern as its summoner. It was enormous and squeezed into the pipe junction, its presence making the hot metal vibrate. Kuro squealed in delight at the sight. The dog lunged with jaws snapping like a hydraulic press, but Kuro did not run. He tilted back with an uncanny, fluid motion, the dog's teeth closing inches from his nose. He scolded the dog sharply, commanding it to stop and trying to control the situation. Kuro taunted the beast, denying it a treat as the Azura path made its move. The bald cyborg raised its arm, the wrist opening to reveal a cluster of rockets. 5 missiles streaked through the steam, leaving corkscrewing trails behind them. Kuro giggled and leaped straight up, kicking off the side of a massive vertical pipe and rebounding toward the oncoming dog. The missiles, unable to match his agility, slammed into the pipe behind him and the floor where he had stood. The explosion rocked the tower. Shrapnel pinged off the pipes and dust and steam billowed outward, obscuring everything. In the chaos, the multi-headed dog lunged blindly. Kuro landed on the middle head, balanced on 1 foot while spinning his grave marker. He shouted that it was noisy and that they would wake the neighbors. The dog thrashed, trying to shake him off. Kuro hopped to the next head, then the next, treating the terrifying beast like a series of stepping stones. He leaped off the snout and flipped through the air toward the animal path, playfully declaring that he had tagged him. He swung the grave marker as a light, non-lethal smack aimed at the ponytailed man's head. The Preta path slid in front of the animal path with surprising speed and raised his hands to form a barrier meant to absorb chakra. The wooden grave marker struck the Preta path in the brow with a dull impact. There was no chakra to absorb. The Preta path stumbled back, a red mark forming on his forehead. Kuro blinked and, looking between his grave marker and the bewildered Preta path, Mach apologized about seasoning the attack, pretending concern that hunger might be the cause. The Azura path did not find this amusing. It shed its cloak to reveal 4 extra arms and a mechanical saw-blade tail, then charged, boots erupting with chakra propulsion. It moved like a juggernaut. Kuro sighed, dodging a saw-blade swipe that sheared through a steam pipe. His voice dropped for a moment into a dark, theatrical tone as he observed how many toys the opponent had and how roughly they played. He ducked under a rocket-powered punch and wove through the labyrinth of pipes as the Azura path pursued, firing laser blasts that melted sections of the walkways. The multi-headed dog recovered and rejoined the chase, snapping at Kuro's heels. To any observer, Kuro seemed to be fleeing, but he was laughing as he vaulted over valves, slid under pipes, and used the chaotic environment to force the dog into the Azura path's line of fire, taunting his pursuers as he moved. From the shadows above, Konan watched, narrowing her eyes. She noted that the child was not using chakra or hand signs. He was simply moving, dancing through a kill box designed to slaughter armies and treating it like a playground. The Azura path halted, its 3 faces rotating into angry expressions. It opened the crown of its head and a blue light began to gather an energy charge for a cannon capable of devastating the corridor. Kuro stood atop a valve wheel, watching the charging laser with disappointment rather than fear, adjusting his grip on the grave marker and dismissing the display as flashy but lacking substance. He waited for the god to fire. Chapter 10. The Strings of the Puppet Master. The Azura path's laser cannon flared and fired a hissing beam of concentrated energy. Kuro did not dodge or block. He collapsed suddenly, dropping flat against the vibrating metal floor just before the beam swept through the space where his chest had been. The beam struck the steam valve behind him and triggered a rupture that sent a pressurized blast of scalding steam through the junction. Sparks and hot droplets fell from above. Kuro's voice echoed around the corridor, mocking that they had missed and suggesting they should get their eyes checked or had too many eyes to focus. The Azura path swiveled as its sensors scanned through the fog. The Preda path remained at the rear. The animal path narrowed his eyes. The Rinnegan shared vision among them, but the child's movements were erratic and lacked the chakra signatures they expected. The animal path observed that the boy was fast and masked his presence well, but still seemed like a rat in a cage. He then clapped his hands together and performed a summoning. 3 puffs of smoke displaced the steam and the air grew heavier as 3 new figures appeared. A hulking, broad-shouldered man with a stone-like face materialized as the Naraka path. A tall, slender man with long orange hair and a diagonal bar through his nose emerged as the human path. In the center stood a man with spiky orange hair and an impassive expression, radiating a cold, divine authority, the Deva path. Kuro dropped from the ceiling and landed lightly on a piece of debris, dusting off his tunic as he quipped about them forming a full party and dressing uniformly. The Deva path stepped forward, ignoring the water pooling around his feet, and asserted that they were pain, that they were God. He raised his hand and, without weaving signs, unleashed a focused wind technique, wind release, gale palm. A compressed blast of wind funneled down the narrow tunnel and slammed into Kuro at supersonic speed. Kuro crossed his arms and formed an X with 2 grave markers to block. The impact threw him backward, skidding down the corridor until his boots caught and he slammed against a valve wheel with a crushing impact. Kuro shook his head, hair falling into his face, and muttered that he had expected more from a god. He blurred forward, aiming at the Deva path and swinging a grave marker toward the leader's neck. The human path moved to intercept and blocked the strike with a kunai. Simultaneously, the Azura path fired a fist rocket from behind Kuro's blind spot. Kuro ducked the fist, spun, and kicked the human path in the chest, but the animal path was there, summoning a giant drill-beaked bird that filled the corridor and forced Kuro to leap back. Kuro whispered that it was annoying. The giggle was gone. It was the eyes. Every time he moved, every time he found an opening, a different body reacted instantly. They were not 6 fighters but 1 fighter with 6 bodies and 360-degree vision. There were no blind spots. Kuro landed on a vertical pipe, looking down at the formation. He called out that they stared too much and that it was rude. The Deva path did not respond to the taunt. It activated Shinra Tensei. An invisible wall of repulsive force expanded from the Deva path center, a fundamental rejection of matter that blasted the pipes, the steam, the water, and Kuro violently away. Kuro flew backward, crashed through a grate, and tumbled into a lower level of the pipe network. He landed in a crouch, water splashing up to his ankles. He stood, cracked his neck, and pulled a third sotoba from his sleeve, commenting that they were getting pushy. The 6 pads dropped down from the hole above and surrounded him in the flooded chamber. Kuro moved again, this time aiming for the noisy one. He sprinted at the Azura path, dodged a barrage of missiles that churned the water into geysers, slid under a sawblade tail swipe, popped up inside the cyborg's guard, and drove his sotoba into the cluster of missiles exposed in the Azura path's chest. With a surge of strength, he twisted. A sharp metallic snap tore through the mechanism. The wooden grave marker, harder than steel, fractured the exposed firing components. The Azura path jerked, sparks showered from its chest, and it collapsed into the water, systems sparking. Kuro declared that it was a broken toy and that its warranty was voided. The large, blocky Naraka path stepped forward and shoved the twitching Azura path toward a spectral, purple-flamed head that rose from the murky water behind it. To most humans the head would have been invisible unless summoned for interrogation, but Kuro could see the King of Hell. The head performed its repair ritual, the mechanical sounds of restoration echoing through the chamber, and moments later the Azura path walked out pristine, repaired, and fully operational. Kuro stopped moving. His playful squint vanished. The contact lenses struggled to hide the phosphorescent glow beneath. He criticized the repair as cheating, saying that taping it back together after breaking it was sloppy and an insult to the trade. Pain through the paths asserted that the cycle of life and death was his to command. Kuro snapped back that pain controlled nothing. In that focused moment on the Naraka path, Kuro made a mistake and forgot the quiet one. The human path slipped behind him, moving through the spray of the water. With a burst of speed it lunged and placed its hand directly on top of Kuro's head, activating its soul absorption technique in an attempt to seize his essence and read his mind. Time seemed to freeze. The human path trembled. Its Rinnegan eyes widened as if it had expected a small prize and instead found something vast and alien. The attempted pull did not retrieve a simple human chakra but met a weighty resistance, like an endless, cold abyss. The connection backfired, creating a freezing feedback that shot up the human path's arm and into Nagato's mind far away. Kuro did not struggle. He turned his head slowly and looked up at the human path's hands still gripping his skull. A grin spread across his face, violent and unsettling. He invited the intruder to look, leaning into the touch. The human path began to shake uncontrollably. Smoke poured from its ears and eyes as the connection overloaded the Rinnegan signal. It was trying to download an ocean into a cup. The Deva path muttered that it was too loud, Nagato's voice bleeding through, strained and pained. Kuro reached up and wrapped his black fingernails around the human path's wrist. He asked whether it had found what it had been looking for or whether it had been too dark in there. With a harsh, non-graphic snap the human path's arm was rendered unusable. The body collapsed backward into the water, smoke rising from it before it went still. Kuro stood over it while the water around him rippled away from his presence in concentric circles, as if the liquid itself avoided touching him. He looked at the remaining 5 paths and began to open a green rift in the air. He said that playtime was over and directed that they get to work. The water in the ruined pipe chamber flowed away from the boy in concentric rings. The human path floated face down, a broken husk severed from the shared mind by a feedback loop of icy resistance. The remaining 5 paths stood frozen for a single heartbeat. Deep within a hidden chamber in the highest tower, Nagato gasped. The feedback had not been mere noise but a sensation of drowning in ice water. For the first time since ascending to his godlike role, Nagato felt a jarring cognitive dissonance. The boy's voice had shifted from a playful lilt to a resonant, ancient vibration that grated against the senses. Nagato identified Kuro as an anomaly, ordered the paths to destroy him, and commanded maximum output from them all. The air in the chamber screamed as the animal path clapped his hands and surged chakra so violently that the metal grating beneath his feet cracked. This was not a tactical summon but a flood. He invoked a rampage summoning. Smoke exploded, displacing the steam and filling the vast vertical of the tower. First came the giant rhino, crashing through a wall of pipes with its horn lowered for a powerful charge. Behind it, the giant ox, an enormous mass of muscle and dark fur, stamped the ground and shook the structure. From the ceiling, a giant centipede uncoiled, its many legs thrumming as it slithered down the walls. The giant crustacean erupted from the flooded floor, sending up a thick mist of bubbles. All of it moved like a coordinated tidal assault, a series of overwhelming, stylized threats that transformed the tower into a chaotic battlefield. Shimmering in the air, vanishing and reappearing, the giant chameleon loomed. It was a zoo of nightmares, a wall of titan flesh and chakra designed to crush a single 12-year-old boy. Naruto, once called Kuro, didn't look up. He reached into the green rift that had torn open beside him, closed his hand around the skeletal handle and pulled. The death scythe emerged, magnificent and terrifying, a long curving silver blade from a handle of bleached bone wrapped in thorny vines, pulsing with a sickly chartreuse light that painted the dark, wet room. Naruto whispered that there were so many guests and not a single one had an appointment. The giant rhino charged first like a locomotive of destruction. Naruto did not brace or leap. He stepped into the path and flowed with it like smoke. He swung the scythe in a lazy upward arc. The silver blade passed through the rhino's armored snout and skull without resistance, but instead of gore it severed the binding. The rhino flickered and dissolved into powdery motes that drifted past Naruto like a harmless breeze. Naruto giggled and counted 1. The giant ox stamped down immediately after. Naruto pivoted on his heel, spun the scythe behind his back and sliced at the ox's legs. The massive beast faded into smoke before it could fall. Naruto counted 2. The Azura Path, repaired and furious, unleashed a barrage, arms launched like rockets and homing projectiles from its shoulders. Simultaneously, the giant centipede uncoiled from the walls and lunged. Naruto landed and waited for the missiles to scream inches from his face. At the last microsecond he dropped flat. The missiles flew over him and slammed into the centipede's open maw. The insect's head was destroyed in a burst of light and smoke. Naruto stood in the clearing dust, dusted off his shoulder, and noted that friendly fire was still not very friendly. The air distorted as the giant chameleon, invisible and clinging to ceiling pipes, lashed its tongue. Naruto said that he could see it, a reaper's perception revealing what others could not. He flicked a loose bolt from the floor with tremendous force. It struck the chameleon in the eye. The lizard's camouflage flickered and failed. As it fell, Naruto leaped and hooked the scythe into its neck, riding the vanishing summon down to the floor. Naruto counted 4. He landed in a splash of water to face the giant crustacean, unleashing a torrent of blinding foam. Naruto spun the scythe like a propeller, the wind parting the foam, slid under the crab's pincer and struck a vital point. The summon fractured and faded. Naruto counted 5. It felt less like a pitched battle between ninja and summoner and more like a gardener pruning overgrown weeds. The Deva Path muttered that it was impossible and asked why the summons were vanishing. Nagato, watching through the Rinnegan, understood the horror. The scythe was not cutting flesh. It was cutting contracts, severing the jutsu itself. Naruto called back that the guest list was simply too loud as he leaped off a falling piece of debris. He found himself level with the animal path. The ponytailed man drew a black receiver rod to engage, but Naruto blurred past the rod entirely and stepped inside the path's guard. He whispered that it was the end of the reel as he slashed the scythe diagonally across the animal path's chest. Glowing film reels spilled from the wound, looping into the air. Naruto grabbed a handful of the memories of the Fuma clan and the fight with Jiraiya and yanked. The connection snapped. The animal path's eyes rolled back, the Rinnegan dimmed, and it collapsed like a puppet with its strings cut. The Deva Path commanded the Preta Path to shield. The fat Preta Path leaped to intercept, raising a barrier to absorb chakra. Naruto taunted that gluttony was a sin and swung. Because there was no chakra to absorb, the barrier did nothing. The blade cut cleanly and the two halves of the body separated and collapsed. Naruto saw the Naraka Path hovering in the back, and behind it the spectral king of hell opening its mouth to consume the fallen paths and revive them. Naruto muttered that there would be no refunds and vanished. Invisibility became his trump card. Nagato's vision fractured. He saw Naruto land and then avoid. Naruto reappeared directly behind the spectral head of the King of Hell and declared that he was revoking the license. He drove the death scythe down into the top of the King of Hell's head. The summon let out a psychic cry and shattered like glass. With its power source destroyed, the Naraka path turned slowly. Naruto delivered a spin kick that sent it tumbling into the darkness of the lower. The Azura path, the last line before Deva, charged its head cannon in a desperate attempt to vaporize the threat. Naruto threw a wooden stake like a javelin. It lodged into the open cannon mechanism. The energy backfired, the mechanism ruptured from within, and the head burst apart, sending gears and plating skittering across the wet floor. The body staggered and then collapsed. Only the Deva path remained. The tower was wrecked, water cascading from the ruined roof. The Deva path stood alone on a twisted metal catwalk, looking down at the Reaper amid the scrap metal and fading smoke of 5 dissolved summons. The Deva path stated that everything had been ruined and began to rise toward the hole in the roof and the stormy sky of Amigakure. Naruto looked up with his scythe-dripping rain, adjusted his tunic, picked a piece of metal from his hair, and cheerfully said that he had not ruined anything but only cleaned up the mess. The Deva path raised both hands toward the black clouds and observed that those who do not know pain will never understand true peace.